Jordan. Sorry.
You want me? I'm talking. I'm talking. Can you hear me talking, Jordan?
And
Okay.
how about me, Jordan? Can you hear me?
Keep talking.
I'm 87 years ago. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal.
Very good.
But wait till you hear the end. Spoiler.
Would you like any water?
Yes, I would. I've had recent dental work, and my gums hurt all the time.
Oh.
And cold water makes them feel a lot better. So thank you. I've even, this is my situation now where I carry around painkillers. I loaded up right before so that I shouldn't have a problem.
Very good. Very good.
Yes.
She's just going to the bathroom.
Well, why don't you check the camera in the bathroom to see if she's
Yeah, no, we
almost
don't
done?
have one of those.
Oh, okay. Well, you do now because I was in there earlier.
Oh, okay.
And I'll give you the URL.
Okay.
ComixExperienceBathroom.com.
Really not dot edgy?
It's .org. I don't charge.
How are you guys all this morning?
Good.
Hey, kids.
Yeah? You guys like the book?
Yeah.
Yeah? Cool. So when we start the show and I go, you guys like the book, you're going to make a lot of noise for it for me?
Yeah. Yeah.
Really? Is that a lot of noise? Can I get a lot of noise?
They're busy reading.
Uh,
They're busy reading. They're getting
all right.
educated.
We'll trust you. We'll trust you. All you guys got the cool buttons too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody got one?
I think
Okay.
so.
Very cool. I thought those were the poppy buttons were very
Oh, can I see that? I never saw much.
Oh, yeah. Go for it. Put that in your pocket.
I saw that they made these, but no one ever sent me one.
There you go.
Cool. Can I? I got a lot in my pocket. Can you just say?
Yeah.
Just,
No problems.
just
I've
try to be
got a whole box full of them. So
my long-term memory is kind of goldfish level. So if you could remind me
I will.
before I leave.
I will.
thanks.
Yes.
Everything okay?
Can do.
Hey, everybody.
Can do.
Yeah, I said.
It's all good. You saw the.
We have.
pins,
Oh, where's?
No, you guys are going to be sharing the mic. I have
Oh.
a live mic. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
Not sure. Don't worry about it. He's got
I have a
solid
lab.
right there.
You get nothing.
Yeah. Okay. You hadn't seen them in person. That's all. Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Nothing to do. So how long have you been in Montreal?
Since April. So, yeah. Oh, thank you.
And so far so good. You liking it?
Yeah, I love it. Yeah.
Okay,
I
cool.
wanna stay.
Like, showing my ignorance. Like, what does everybody there speak English, or do most people?
Can you open this bag?
There's polarity. No. There's. I had problems with it too. There we go.
That's the thing you got to do.
There we
Yeah.
go.
Then it makes it easy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
It's child-proof.
So most people,
And
adult
me
people.
proof.
So you were saying most people do speak English there?
Yeah, but usually in Montreal, usually their first language is French. So it's like the default language. People tend
So
to
they'll start
agree
speaking to
with.
you in French, and you're like, "I'm sorry, I'm an American."
Yeah, but a mere fool. And then they'll kind of like roll their eyes a bit, but yeah.
Americano. Yeah, I don't know much about Quebec. The only part of Canada I've ever been to was like Toronto for like 4 days, and that's it.
Oh yeah.
That's the only time I've ever been to any part of Canada.
Was that just for?
It was for the Martian premiere.
Oh really? Oh. Okay.
It was in Toronto.
Okay.
Yeah, it was at
Cool.
TIFF,
Wow.
Toronto International Film Festival.
Oh, okay.
So that was a cool. It was a cool week, but that was
Wow.
the only time I've ever been in Canada.
Okay, so you must have good memories.
I do. And I remember the thing that impressed me most about Canada was that their money has Braille
Yeah.
on it. And I was like, what an elegant and simple idea. Like, why doesn't everybody do that?
Right.
It's like, I'm like, that is so cool. I just like, what a good idea. And
Yeah.
like, I never thought of that.
Yeah, and they use coins more heavily too, which is like tough to get used
I hate
to,
that.
but
Yeah.
makes more sense once you do.
No. I hate coins.
I think it's more eco-friendly. It probably is, but I would remind you that paper grows on trees. But no, I hate coins. I hate that jingling. I hate that the weight.
Yeah,
It's easier if you're a woman because if you have a purse, then you can just.
Oh, yeah, you're
Are
right.
you good, Jordan? Yep. Anytime or?
Wow.
Okay.
You just straight up ask him about his moral alignment, huh?
Pretty much.
Jordan, are you good, or would you say you're more neutral good, or
Chaotic evil.
chaotic good? Excellent.
Cool. And you've already turned off the music, so I don't have to ask if the music get turned off. So tell me when you want to start.
I will.
Oh, let me silence my phone. Silence.
My wife.
Has gone off before during the show, which is.
Yeah, Sarah really wishes she could be here. Sarah, other Sarah, Sarah Guthrie. Got you some books and autographs. Period. Smiley face. Oh, I should get her a Cheshire Crossing also. I got her all your books and then forgot about ours.
Wait, oh yeah, we did do this massive 3-year-long project together.
Well, it was really easy for me. It was like, hey, this thing we wrote a few years ago, you want to have a talented artist do it? And I'm like, sure. They're like, how about Sarah Andersen? I'm like, sure. And then you went off and did like absurdly huge amounts of work while I kind of sat back and did nothing.
Yeah, but you were very easy to work with because usually authors like need a lot of changes and edits, especially if they've like drawn the characters before.
Oh, yeah.
But you were like, no, looks great.
Looks good to me.
I don't think you requested a single change actually.
I don't think so. What I did was I would request changes to the notes that
We're about ready to go.
publisher made.
Okay.
Save
Like-
it for the camera.
Yeah, save it for
Oh
the
yeah, sorry.
Save it for the
We're off to the races over here.
Yeah.
Okay, in 5, 4, 3,
2.
Good morning, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of August. Our book this month is the fantastic Cheshire Crossing by Andy Weir and Sarah Andersen, who we're both very lucky to have here in the studio. You guys like the book, yeah?
Yeah!
Ooh, that's some enthusiastic.
There we go.
I like that.
Good.
Very, very, very good. That's excellent. Great. Well, so let's talk about this. Actually, let's start. My first question is always my first question. I love this question. But why comics? You could do anything in your life.
Well, before we answer that, just a quick thing. You should also be able to brag a little bit. This is the only event that we're both going to be at.
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah, so just you.
Awesome.
You're the only one
Awesome.
who gets both the...
You get both?
Both of us.
Very good. I like that. I like that.
Only the people here today are going to get books with both of our autographs and stuff like that.
Yeah, otherwise you'd have to like travel across the country to get both signatures.
Or do a lot of mailing.
Yeah, mailing, yeah.
So you should be proud. You're it.
Awesome, I love that. I think that's fantastic. And I really appreciate both of you being willing to do this. So, comics, why comics? Sarah, you can start with that one.
Okay, sure. So I just always loved the medium. I've been reading comics since I was a child with Calvin and Hobbes, and I love both writing and art. So I went to school to be an illustrator and a creative writing minor. So I just love how it fuses the two worlds, and it's just like a perfect storytelling device for me.
And when you went to school to be an illustrator, was that just generally being an illustrator, or did you go into it thinking, I'm going to do comics?
I was trying to do more editorial, but then I also had this creative writing minor, and so sort of like the natural fusion was to go into comics. And I didn't like connect the pieces until later. But yeah, I was trying to be more of like an editorial illustrator, but then sort of naturally found my way into comics after Sarah Scribbles kind of took over.
Yeah, neat. Andy?
Well, for me, it's kind of funny. I got really into webcomics as a consumer. I really liked reading webcomics back in the kind of late 90s, early 2000s. And I was like, I'm going to make a webcomic. And so I did. It was called Casey and Andy. It ran for many, many years. And then as I kind of finished Casey and Andy, I started working on the original Cheshire Crossing. And I really realized that I like writing comics, but I don't like drawing them. I do not like the process of art. It's something that I just started dreading more and more and more. And I said, that's okay. I'm just not an artist. I'm a writer. And I focused on writing. And So after that, I started moving on to just putting straight up narrative fiction on my website instead of webcomics, and that led to The Martian and all that fun stuff.
Right.
And then so after The Martian came out and everything was all successful, Tapas Media was originally the people, they said like, hey, we like this comic. Of course, the art is horrible. So how about we get a talented artist to redraw everything? And I'm like, sure, that sounds good. And they said, hey, how about Sarah Andersen? I'm like, yeah, because I'd been a fan of Sarah's scribbles for years, so I already knew who she was. Cool. So yeah, it worked out really well for me. And it was super easy for me. All I had to do was say, yes, and then she had to do months of work, like
3 years.
3 years of, well, on and off, right? I mean,
Yeah.
but yeah, enormous amounts of work on her end, and all I did was say, like, sure, yeah. It was kind of like actually meeting up here, whereas I live in the area, she had to come from Montreal.
Right? Yeah. It took you a couple of years, though, to figure out that you didn't want to be an artist, and yet you were locked into, these long-form projects, I guess.
Yeah.
What was it that made you decide that you didn't want to be an artist, I suppose?
I guess, I just didn't enjoy the I started dreading doing the artwork. Now, I would always get, like, a lot of happiness out of when I was done with, a page or something like that. I'd look at it and like, that's just what I wanted. But that started to not be as much as the pain of making the page. It would take me about a week to make one page.
Right.
And that's when I had no life. Now I'm married. I've got a life going on, and I definitely did not have a life back then. And so I had plenty of time to put in the art. So it took me. I'm not a talented artist like Sarah is. I have to just gut it out, and I'm like, that doesn't look right. Okay, how do I change? Okay, well that looks worse. No, okay, now how do I? I just like every little thing is just an enormous amount of work for me to make it look even fairly passable. So it just I don't know. I realized that art is not my passion. Writing is.
And just to follow up on that, I'm curious, when you write, do you have that same kind of struggle?
No, not nearly as much.
Okay, so it just flows.
Well, no.
Okay.
No.
I was just saying, trying to clarify.
No. No, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's the same as anything else. 99% perspiration.
Sure.
But I enjoy it more. Like, as I'm gutting it out, it's like, it's work that I enjoy. And yeah, I'm not going to lie. There are times when I'm just like, I would rather do anything than write. I mean, the closer I get to my deadline, the cleaner my house gets.
Right.
Because, I'm like, I'm cleaning the house. I'm doing chores. I don't have time to write right now. But yeah, I do. I really enjoy writing, and it's one of those things where everything you do, whatever hobby it is, whether it's gardening or not hobby, these are professions, but whatever it is you do, whether it's like gardening or woodworking or anything, there's parts of it that are just really unpleasant. There's parts of it where you're like working hard and you kind of want to stop, but you've got to gut it out. But at the end, the payoff is when you finish the project, you feel really good about yourself and you're really proud of what you've accomplished. Yeah. As long as the happiness you get from that is more than the misery you get from doing the hard work, this is a worthwhile endeavor. For me, art shifted too much in the wrong direction. But writing is definitely very much in the positive direction for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You both started off doing webcomics, and you still do webcomics, Sarah.
Well, hers is like orders of magnitude.
Sure, no, I
way more.
Obviously, so I'm going to aim this question to you mostly, Sarah. It seems to me that being an artist doing webcomics is really, really difficult to make a living, because you're one of the lucky ones who actually just hit whatever vein it is that people needed to push you to become viral.
Talent was part of that.
Talent is certainly part of it. Oh, absolutely. But I think you know as well as I do, there's plenty of talented people out there who never, for whatever reason, they don't get that thing, that break, that push. So can you talk maybe a little bit about kind of those first couple of steps where you're not making any money?
I was lucky enough to be in school, so I was a student for the first 3 years of the webcomic, so I wasn't so much worried about monetizing yet. So it was very convenient, and I was very lucky in terms of timing. You know, like Tumblr had just started taking off, so like things going viral was kind of like a new thing a bit. And so by the time I graduated, I had already laid this groundwork.
Yeah.
And then I started freelancing, and that took about 2-3 years. And then I didn't start making money until I got book deals. So it was the switch over to publishing. But now with Patreon and stuff, it is a little bit more easier a little bit more easy to monetize.
Yeah, but it would seem to me also at the same time that there's now so many more channels, so many more things looking for attention that it's probably harder to get that kind of initial.
Yeah, but there's a lot of people looking. Like a lot of people want to be on Patreon, and a lot of people want to support artists. And, yeah.
Well, also it can't be overstated. It's just your comic is really good. Like, I mean, it's funny. It makes you laugh, and it speaks to you at like a. It's one of those things. It's like it's literally called Sarah's Scribbles. Like it's this little. The artwork reflected in Sarah's scribbles is like 1% of her actual artistic talent, but what the real thing it gives you is it's funny. It's just these observations. I'm like, I find myself like just quoting your comic just in my daily life. One of my favorite strips, and I think I told you this like a couple of years ago. The last time we saw each other one other time before today. This is the second time we've ever met in person, and it was like me and my then girlfriend, she's my wife now, but me and my girlfriend and her all had lunch at Comic-Con, at San Diego Comic-Con. But one thing I loved is that one where it's like, it's Sarah's friend introducing her to her cat, Smokey. And it's like, Comic Sarah is like, suspicion, and the cat's like, suspicion, and then like Sarah's petting the cat, it says mutual suspicion, and I use that all the time. I'm like, mutual suspicion. You know? I love that term.
There are things that you can do in comics that clearly you can't do in prose. Do you feel as an author that you're using different parts of your writing muscle? Or is it the same writing muscle? Is that question make sense?
I understand. Yeah, it's very different writing for a visual medium. I've also written some screenplays. I've got way more experience writing novels than screenplays, but it's a similar thing where there are parts of it that are awesome and parts of it that are really painful. The awesome parts are you don't have to describe a visual scene in the narrative. Like if something requires the reader to understand the layout of a room or what a person looks like or stuff like that, in a visual medium, you can just, in the case of comics, you can just make a note to the artist, or in the case of like a visual medium, you put it in like a screenplay, you put it in the line notes. But in a book, you have to describe, especially imagine a movie like, I mean, these kids are probably too young to have seen it or even heard of it, but Dial M for Murder. In that movie, the layout of the apartment that the main character lives in is extremely critical to the story. So in a movie, that's fine. They just show you the apartment. But if you were going to write a book of that, you would have to describe in detail the layout of the apartment. And that would be very boring to read. But on the other hand, a visual medium is painful for direct exposition of like the past. So if I want to say like, oh, this thing happened in this character's past, or this is how the government of this fictional kingdom works, or whatever, I can literally just step aside in a book and have like a paragraph describing it. And I'm done. In a visual medium, you have to sneak it in as exposition.
Sure.
And that can be really hard when all of your characters know it. And so it's like, why are all of your characters talking about something that they all already know? It's like, as you know, we live in a representative democracy with a bicameral legislature. And then, it's like, why?
There are two parties, correct?
There are two principal parties, and the House is composed of four. And it's like, if you're writing a novel, you can just describe it, and you can just say, listen, reader, I don't want to do this, you don't want to do this, but we got to do this. Here's a little bit of homework for you. Just get through this paragraph, and then we can move on with the fun stuff.
Right.
And you can't do that in visual medium.
Yeah. Now it's interesting that the first novel, The Martian. I think was so successful because you were so good at describing things, and bringing us into that world. You know, certainly when I picked up the novel, I mean, I think I literally didn't put it down for 8 hours. You know, because I just got sucked right
You
in.
didn't read it. You were just carrying it.
Yeah, I was just carrying it around. Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
You'd run out of toilet paper.
Yeah. Oh, I needed a footstool too,
right,
so
yeah,
you know,
right,
just
so,
yeah. No, but I mean, seriously, I think that that's a pretty amazing gift there, and to be able to do that. I guess the thing I wanted to ask you, and I will go back to the comic again, only because I only had this one chance to ever ask this question.
We'll get back to you. We'll get back to you.
Just forget about it. Don't worry about it.
But so your first novel, and then Ridley Scott decides to direct it, and you've got fucking Pitt in. I mean, Matt Damon. Sorry, same guy. Yeah.
You got every part of that sentence
Right,
wrong.
yeah.
You swore in front of children, and you got the actor's name wrong.
I know. I'm
I
terrible.
I want to take a moment so that you can feel bad about it.
I do,
Okay,
and I appreciate that.
Okay, good.
Because it's on camera forever, and it will always live on the internet. So,
y'all hear
it's
that,
all
kids?
good. Yeah, it's all good. It always lives on the internet.
Yeah.
So, what was that experience like? If you can sum it up.
It was really surreal.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't feel real.
It didn't. It felt like I was
Daydreaming, or it felt made up.
Yeah.
It's like I did not believe that it was happening. A big part of my irrational mind was going like, no, this is not actually happening.
Right.
No, it's not actually happening. Because for me, it was all just phone calls. It's not like I'm in the heavy hitters meetings or hanging out with Matt Damon. It's just like, it was all just going on somewhere else.
Right.
And I was getting phone calls saying like, oh, we've got, the day 3 of shooting in the can here, and, we're going along fine. I'm like, good. And it's like, I didn't really emotionally believe that it had happened until I saw a cut of the film, and they brought me into Fox, and they sent me in one of their little test studios and stuff like that, and I saw a cut of the film, and it looked awful because most of the special effects weren't in, so they put in placeholder special effects that are grainy JPEGs and stuff like that. But I was in tears. It was very emotional. It's amazing. And it's one of those things where then the next thing that happens is imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Hey kids, imposter syndrome is when you feel like you don't deserve the accolades that you're getting. When everybody says hey, you're awesome, and you feel like, no, I'm not, you're all wrong. That's imposter syndrome. And everybody gets that from time to time, and I got it big time after that. There's a saying I like to say is, give a person a book and you entertain them for a night. Teach a person to write, and you give them crippling self-doubt for life.
Was it hard to write the next thing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
In fact, the next thing I wrote was a book called CHESHIRE, which you've never heard of, because it didn't get published. I got 70,000 words into it. For reference, The Martian is about 100,000 words long, the whole book. I got 70,000 words into CHESHIRE, and then one day I was looking at it, and I'm like, uh-oh, this sucks. And so I was like, I can't figure out where to go with this. The plots are not harmonizing well. The characters are not interesting. I'm 70,000 words in, and I'm still in the first act. This is going to be some 600-page tome that no one's going to want to read.
Right.
And I'm just like, this is a disaster, and I don't know what to do. And I called my publisher, and I said, hey, I've got this other story for an idea about a low-level criminal on the moon, which was Artemis. And I said, can I write that instead, and you give me another year on my deadline? And they said yes, because they had also been reading CHESHIRE as I did. And they agreed that it sucked. So, I was super insecure. That was a really low point for me. I'm like, if I follow up The Martian with CHESHIRE, I'm going to be a one-hit wonder. But I also had to accept the fact that if I live to be 100 years old and I write a book every year until then, when I die, my obituary is going to say the guy who wrote The Martian and some other stuff died.
Sure. So. Yeah, I get that. So you did Cheshire Crossing as your own webcomic. Did it? Because I didn't go and actually read the webcomic version.
It's virtually identical.
Yeah.
It just has much worse art.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what was it like for you, Sarah, to be given a completed comic and then to redraw it, essentially?
Yeah. It was interesting because I usually have a heavy hand in the writing process. but it was kind of like a relief to just have all the writing just be done, and I could kind of like just turn off my brain and just draw. So it was actually kind of nice. I mean, it was a lot of design work in the beginning because there's so many characters, and of course I have to like come up with character designs based on your designs for each one. So there was a lot of sort of like, design work in it. But in other ways it was very easy because the story was just there, and I just was able to kind of turn off the writing part and just draw.
Well, I guess with the design work also, I get you presumably had to account for the 100 years or so of popular culture on those characters themselves.
Yeah.
These are not characters I invented, right?
Right, right. Illustrating Alice in Wonderland and trying to make her unique is interesting.
When did you use his original comics as a blueprint of any kind in terms of angles and staging, or did you just not?
No, I did. I think every single page I had your pages up, and some of them, when you look at them side by side, look pretty identical. Or not identical, but some of the shots are very similar. So I was definitely like heavily referencing Andy's work while I was creating my own.
But she made it a lot better. I mean, not just in terms of artistic quality, but in terms of like camera angles and stuff like that. Like I tended to use really flat things because I don't know what I'm doing.
Sure.
Right. And so, I'm like, oh, yeah, flat or orthogonal things are good. Yay. And she made it much more, angled and more comic-y.
It's hard to, I don't know the terminology.
Perspective.
Yeah. So, because again, I never looked at the originals. Is it essentially like a remaster of it? Do you know what I mean? Or did you expand scenes, contract scenes?
No, it's essentially just a remaster. I mean, there were some very small details we had to change, but yeah.
There was a few things that came down from the publisher that neither of us cared about, but they did. Some of the jokes and stuff were a little racy, and they wanted to make sure this was suitable for all ages.
Sure.
So they had us tone that down, and that required. Sarah had done, and what's kind of annoying is that the publisher came up with all these things after Sarah had done the art, right? So Sarah does the art and goes like, "There you go," and they're like, "Ooh, we don't like this joke. You got to change that." And we were like, "Well, the only way to change that would be to have Sarah redraw a bunch of stuff." So we put a lot of time into trying to figure out, like, okay, how can we just change just the dialogue and stuff like that, and
Well, and how long did that process take?
That wasn't too bad. That was like from my end, that wasn't too bad. That was like maybe a week or two. And Sarah did have to make some little changes, but I was always, when they were telling me, "Hey, Andy, you have to write this part different," my 100%, my focus was, how do I do this with zero or absolutely minimal art changes? So it'd be like, oh, you could put the fairy ball, just kind of put it in the corner in front of the scene here, just copy paste it from an earlier frame or something, just that sort of stuff.
Yeah, the edits were very quick.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you were saying earlier that he wasn't requesting you to make any changes or anything.
Yeah, no, there were some those final edits at the end where we just had to, tie up some loose ends and stuff.
Also legal stuff.
Yeah, some legal stuff. We had to change hair color, I believe.
Yeah, legal stuff, because Mary Poppins, who is not in this book, Miss Poole, in the original Cheshire Crossing, is straight up Mary Poppins. And but that's still a copyright. All the other characters here are in public domain, like, 100 plus years old. But Mary Poppins is still under copyright. So we had to keep, their legal department kept making us make little changes.
Yeah.
And one of them they said was like, well, we don't want her to have an umbrella. We want her to have a cane. And I really said, like, Sarah would have to redraw every single frame with her in it, because she's always holding that umbrella. And so we just agreed to, like, change the umbrella's color, I think, or something like that,
You didn't have any problems from the British charity that has some sort of control over
that's
Peter Pan?
So a little background. Peter Pan is in the public domain, but also J.M. Barrie, the original author, in his will, he left the copyright of Peter Pan to the Great Ormond Street
children's hospital in London. And so Britain, the nation of Britain, granted a perpetual copyright for just Peter Pan, so that the hospital could continue getting revenue from it. But other countries don't necessarily recognize that. It's kind of a morass legally. But the way it ends up working out is it's kind of like, if you want to be cool, give that hospital some money if you're doing Peter Pan related stuff. But we didn't run into any issues with that. So, yeah.
Okay. And why these three characters to begin with?
Well, I don't know what got me thinking about it, but it's basically just like the League of Extraordinary Ladies, right? I mean, it's just, what it was is one day I was, I don't know, having a Wikipedia wander or something like that, and I realized that Peter Pan and The Wizard of Oz both came out the same year. Like, Peter Pan and The Wizard of Oz both came out in 1904. And I thought, well, that's an interesting coincidence.
Yeah.
And then I got to thinking about Alice in Wonderland, which actually came out almost 50 years earlier. But I was like, what if these three girls were all together? Peter Pan's a boring character. The main character of Peter Pan is Wendy. Like, most people don't realize that.
Sure.
But Wendy is the protagonist of Peter Pan. And I was like, wait, all three of these girls have had like similar experiences. They all go to another world. They all have an adventure. They all come back and stuff like that. They were all about 10 to 12 years old at the time they had their adventures. And I was like, well, that's neat. And thinking with my science brain, I'd be like, well, if I knew three girls who all had the ability to just go to another dimension, I'd kind of want to study that. And that's kind of what got me thinking of it. And I'm like, well, if you put those three girls together and they start zip-zapping back and forth. I've long before I was an established successful author, I was a crossover geek. I was always writing crossover fan fiction of like, Battlestar Galactica, and I was working on one that was Battlestar Galactica, Knight Rider, Airwolf, and the A-Team. All together. I was going to call it Action 80s. And so Battlestar Galactica gets to Earth, Starbuck crashes onto Earth along with a Cylon ship.
Right.
They take apart the Cylon ship and with that technology make Kit, the car, which has the Cylon eye up front, and Airwolf, which uses a propulsion system. Starbuck assumes a new identity of Templeton Peck and becomes Face for the A-Team because they were both played by Dirk Benedict, same actor.
Yeah, I can see that.
Action 80s.
I can see that. How did they approach you, Sarah, to do this, or did you know the work before?
I knew The Martian. I had read and watched The Martian, but I was working for Tapastic, they're a company that I believe they required the rights, or they acquired the rights to your story.
Yes, they wanted to make a good version of it. Yeah.
I had been uploading my webcomic with them for years, so it was sort of just a natural fit.
And we have this book that's already written and drawn. We'd like you to redraw it. That's not a request that happens very often that I'm aware of in comics.
Right.
In fact, really, it's the only time I can think of it happening. What was your immediate reaction to that?
I was like, well, this is a really unusual project, but I'm game.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you started reading what he did, and
Yeah, and I read the whole thing, and I was like, yeah, I'm into it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to the kids to see if you guys have any questions. You guys must have questions. Very good. Right in the front row.
I just have a question about, I might be wrong, but so about Dorothy's slippers. So in here they're silver, right? And then in the book, are they silver?
They're silver in the books, actually.
In
the movie, they're ruby slippers, but that was just in the movie.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the reason for that was MGM, who made the movie. They were very proud of their new color process because the movie was made in 1939. So they were very proud of their new color, and they wanted bright, vibrant colors. So they changed them to ruby slippers so they'd be nice and red.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense.
Also, fun fact: the ruby slippers, not the rest of the Wizard of Oz, but ruby slippers are still under copyright. So you can't have Dorothy wearing ruby slippers in your comic.
You can have her wearing the silver slippers that she originally wore, but not the ruby slippers.
Interesting. Yep.
Why did you put the A word in the script?
A word. Which A word?
Is there a bad word?
I don't think it's in there.
Somewhere.
Is it a 3-letter A word or is it like a 7? Oh, well, that's not that bad. Come on. It's a type of donkey.
No, it's not just a donkey.
That one's fair. There's some light swearing, super light swearing, like not even PG, I would say, just like G, really. And I mean, but we wanted to show at times that the characters were really angry or upset or insulting each other, and so we used the gentlest words that we could to indicate the anger that they're feeling.
Yes, please.
Why is it called Cheshire Crossing?
Well, Cheshire is a location in England, but also it refers to the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. And England has a lot of places that are named something crossing, you know, and it's generally just where two roads cross is, 500 years ago, it's where two roads cross, and then they called it, something crossing, and then a whole city shows up, and the whole city is called Crossing. I decided that the estate that the girls are being studied at is called Cheshire Crossing. It's somewhere in the Cheshire region, and it was near a crossing. And also, it's a little bit of a pun because Cheshire for the Cheshire Cat, and crossing because it's a crossover.
Makes sense. Yeah, right in the front row.
Salamander.
How did you get inspired to write the book?
This? Well, I mean, I was just talking about that earlier. I was just thinking about. I noticed that that Peter Pan and the Wizard of Oz came out in the same year. And I thought, oh, that's weird. Those girls would be contemporaries. They'd be the same age as they grew up. So what if they met? And that's kind of what got me thinking about it.
Yep.
Will you make another CHESHIRE Crossing?
If it makes enough money, yeah. And if Sarah's, well, basically, that's kind of largely up to the publisher, right? If it makes enough money for the publisher to be happy and want more, then I'm certainly happy to write it. It's really Sarah who does 99% of the work. No, seriously. I mean, so it would really be up to her to decide whether or not she wants to engage in that project again, and whether or not the pay is worth the hassle.
I'd be down.
Yeah, I would not. What's that?
Oh, no, that wasn't a bad word.
Oh, I didn't hear.
Sorry about the bad word, please.
No. Yeah, hassle is not a bad word.
You mean that I can say it all the time?
You can say hassle as much as you want.
No, I mean,
No, he didn't.
But any.
It rhymes with that. There's
Yeah.
a word that rhymes with that.
Oh,
He did
no.
not say that.
HASSLE. It means an annoyance or an irritation.
hassle.
But anyway, I would not be willing to do it with a different artist. I'd want the. So if she's not game, then I would just not want to do it.
Well, I imagine too, if you did a second one, I mean, you couldn't. It's not like the first one where you wrote and drew it already.
No, I'd write a script.
Yeah, you'd have to write a script. So
Yeah.
It's probably not. She'd be doing 99% of the work, right? You'd be doing a lot more work the second time through.
That's true. But my script would just be like stick figures. And I would probably, I would love to just dump more creative control onto Sarah, which she would probably enjoy anyway. And so I would be like, I'd be like, well, here's the story, and I wrote it with like little boxes and stick figures, but you can change the framing, the paneling, and like what happens in which panels and whatever. But it's always advisable when you're, so when I was writing the original, like back when I was doing the art, I learned that it's really important to like do it as like stick figures and then see if the text that you think you're putting in a panel is going to fit. Because it's amazing how much space text takes up. So if you have this guy making some huge soliloquy and you realize that's going to eat the whole page, you're like, okay, I have to not have that.
Sure.
So,
Sure. This actually brings up an interesting thought for you, Sarah. Sort of traditionally, when people do comics, they as he said, they lay them out. They do breakdowns and stick figures. But you almost didn't have to do that in this case, right? Did you just go straight to penciling?
Almost. I mean, there
You
was,
condensed a few frames and stuff like that.
yeah. There was there was a pretty. There was a sketch phase where I was basically just like taking what you had done and then taking like my interpretation of it and just like moving things around.
You are pretty sketchy.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes. But then we also had a letterer, so I actually didn't do the colors or the lettering.
Which is not normally how you work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I usually do both.
So
You also do all the coloring on Sarah's scribbles, right?
Yes. Was it difficult for you to give up that step, or
No, I love doing less work.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, in the back.
You guys have kids. Do you self-edit with for your inner child, or do you self-edit with the idea of what a kid might want to read?
I have no children. I think
I
you
have
also
no-
know that.
yeah.
And it's an interesting way of looking at it with the inner child. I think it helps that I'm really immature, so I'm not far from my inner child anyway.
Yeah, and I was kind of just writing to what I thought my past self would have liked to see.
Yeah, go ahead.
Miss Anderson, you have a very distinctive look, and it seems to be very similar to your
Yeah,
characters.
yeah.
And I just wondered if that's sort of where how you get inspiration, or how you sort of draw your characters. I'm not familiar with your other animation. And I also thought that this was the first panel on the front page were evocative of Andrew Wyatt's Christina's World. I don't know if that's just a coincidence, or if you were inspired by that.
That one is just a coincidence, but that's a really interesting observation. I've gotten the comments about like my look and the way my work looks before, and I think it's just aesthetic decisions and how I style both characters and myself. It's just, pulling from things in the world that I like and putting them on both me and the work.
So there's one Sarah's scribbles where, comic Sarah, there's a lot of Sarah's scribbles are like a narrator talking to Sarah, right? And so it's like the narrator's like, do you ever just go out without washing your hair? Yeah, sometimes I have to do that. Do you ever go out without trying out a bunch of outfits? Oh, sure, sometimes I'll just throw out what happens when you do it without, eyeliner? And she's like, I never let that happen. Or was it mascara? Was it eyeliner? What was the line?
Yes.
It was eyeliner, yeah. And it's like, and Comic Sarah's just like, I never let that happen.
And they've all got some kind of eye makeup on. Yeah.
Now, Sarah, your work is almost always contemporary, and obviously this book is period, and then a lot of fantasy. Was that a challenge for you to make that shift?
No, because interestingly enough, all my work, the illustration work I was doing in school, was very vintage inspired. So like, for example, one of my favorite illustrators is Kai Nielsen. So I really like the golden age of illustration and have worked in that mode before. So no, I had a great time going back, and it was sort of natural.
Okay. How much research did you have to do for period costume and thing like that?
A lot. I was on Pinterest a lot. I have a whole board if you're ever interested
Oh, cool.
in seeing it.
Does it have like yarn and pins and?
No, not quite. But yeah, there was a lot of research and I have a lot of reference that I was looking at. So, yeah.
That came out great. Even the details of in the back of the room or the wallpaper and stuff like that. It
Looked very vintage. Like in the girls' room, I noticed there's like wainscoting followed by wallpaper, and
of course, in my version, it was just like blank.
Yeah.
It's like backgrounds are a nuisance.
Did you have another question?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. This might sound pretty stupid. Is it a coincidence that both Cheshire, the words Cheshire and Crossing have 8 letters?
That is a coincidence.
Smart observation, though.
No, you've caught me. It's part of the Illuminati. No, that's just a coincidence.
But if you spell them backwards,
It spells
that's pretty funny.
Is it?
No. But I'm just being polite, That's what happens when you've got the guest. Who else? Someone else got a question. Hamilton, you got a question? No?
No one's got a question.
No? Yeah, please.
Adults allowed.
Yeah, adults are allowed. Yeah.
I was thinking a little bit about Lucy in Narnia and wondering what would happen. I know she's from a little later time period, but what might happen if they met up with the kids from the Chronicles of Narnia?
So I thought about, when I started writing Cheshire Crossing, I thought about, okay, there's a whole plethora of children who've gone to other worlds, and, how many of them do I want to work in?
Right.
And one problem with the kids from Narnia is, first off, still under copyright.
Yeah.
Second off, more importantly, very, very intimately tied to World War II.
Yeah.
The girl, Alice in Wonderland was written in, the 1850s, right? But I could just kind of advance her up to the early 1900s and nobody notices or cares. But if I moved the girls from Narnia back to 1900, then things stop making sense because it's wait a minute, everybody knows they're World War II refugee kids, basically. And so that wouldn't work. I did consider Bastian from The Neverending Story because he has the ability to go to, what's the name of it? Fantastica? Is that called Fantastica?
Something like that, yeah.
The world of The Neverending Story. I thought that would be cool. What I did have in mind for future sequels, and you may yet see them, was I thought of Willy Wonka. I wanted to introduce a young Willy Wonka, and he'd actually even be younger than the girls, not a potential romance interest, but actually a 10-year-old boy. And he's this almost steampunk crazy inventor kid who's a genius, and he has the ability to go to Oompa Loompa, which is where the Oompa Loompas are from. So he's also a multiplanar kid. And then it's really subtle, but the guy who's hanging out with the professor in the book, there's this guy, this assistant to Ernest Rutherford, and he's just there, and he never explains why he's there or anything like that. Yeah. And at one point he's called Lem. L-E-M.
Yeah, I've been
just
wondering.
Lem. He is Lemuel Gulliver of Gulliver's Travels.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So he's Gulliver. He's already had his adventures, and during his travels, he got basically a potion of youth and stuff like that. So his adventures were in the 1700s, in the book, and he's been there the whole time. And so he's actually the one who's funding all of this. Spoilers, stuff like that, because he wants to get back to. Lilliput.
I like that idea.
So there you go.
Yeah.
And he's just there. Yeah. I was going to reveal that later. Now I've given you spoilers for issue 9 or something.
Say Doctor Who should show up.
What's that?
The Doctor Who should show up.
Doctor Who. Okay, yeah. Although to be fair, the Doctor never goes into. The Doctor sometimes goes to other dimensions, but not magical other realms.
Right.
Did go to E-space and N-space.
I feel like the Doctor went somewhere magical once.
Well, there's magic from time to time,
Yeah.
but the magic is just science that
Right.
looks like magic.
Yeah. Well, and anyway, if you can travel through dimensions, maybe you could travel through time too.
Possible. Hadn't thought about time travel. I wanted to stick with
Fantasy on this one.
Yeah.
We've already got a lot of elements going on.
Yeah. Well, also, with very rare exceptions, I don't think fantasy and sci-fi mix well.
Sure.
There are a few exceptions of really successful things that merge elements of both. And I know this is a very silly thing to say, but He-Man, Masters of the Universe, is in my day was super popular, not just for the action figures, but the whole story and the mythos surrounding it. And that takes place in Eternia, which is a land at the edge of science and magic. They've always said that that's what it is. It's right at the edge of science and magic. And in fact, Prince Adam's mother was an astronaut from Earth. And she crashed on Eternia because her ship stopped working when she crossed into the magical realm part, because the science stopped working. And so that's a really interesting merger. That's why you have sword fights, but also laser pistols. But for the most part, when you try to merge sci-fi and magic, it doesn't work. And when I say that, everybody's like, what about Star Wars? To which I say, Star Wars is not science fiction. Star Wars is fantasy.
Yeah.
It's a fantasy story.
you have wizards, you have knights, you have sword fights, you have epic infantry battles. It's a fantasy story with a sci-fi sheen, but it's a very good fantasy story.
Sure.
Anyway,
But it always
I'm rambling.
says a galaxy far, far away, so we never know.
Yeah, it takes place in a galaxy a long time ago. That's what I like to ask people. How far in the future does Star Wars take place, do you think? And the answer is, aha, tricked you. It takes place a long time ago. You've fallen into my trap.
I bet the answer is probably not, but as long as we're both here like this, is there anything that, like that thing about Lem, that you've wondered about this story, that you have a question for him on?
I'm doing a quick scan because there are so many things that briefly get brought up and are not resolved.
Like Alice has a boy she has a crush on.
Yes.
Yeah.
What's his name? Richard?
Richard.
Yeah, who's Richard?
Who's Richard?
That's my question.
Yeah.
Who's Richard?
Who's Richard? I have a whole storyline set up for him, and the idea is for if there's an issue too. Basically, Alice, the Liddells are extraordinarily wealthy. Like they have this gigantic estate and everything like that, and Alice is like a very, very rich girl. Her family's very rich. And Richard is like a stable boy that who works there, and she's like had a crush on him since she was a little girl.
Okay.
And so there's like a little somewhat romance plot there. So,
Okay, all right.
yeah, just a crush, nothing scandalous.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, another question about that. I was just thinking. Okay, so you just explained that. Do you think anything like something that happened in The Princess Bride might end up like that or something like that? Because that sounds a little bit like the plot in The Princess Bride.
Are you
Is that
talking
not a-
like which? You mean about Buttercup having a crush on
Yeah.
Wesley, or?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, actually, the idea. I mean, I'm giving probably spoilers for later, but the personality I had in mind for Richard was like so incredibly like kind of almost naively pure, like. He doesn't realize that Alice has a crush on him. He's just kind of oblivious, and he's just such a nice, sweet boy, and he's like very unassuming and very like modest and stuff. So he's not like the sort of guy who would end up becoming a swashbuckling pirate.
Well, I'd love to see another one.
Yeah.
Would you guys?
Yeah!
Yeah, right? Say it even louder. Yeah, no, everybody who's read it, who's come back with us with opinions said they really like the book a lot. So,
Cool.
And it seems like there's a lot of rich worlds that you could mine here and keep going.
It has infinite potential. I mean, one thing we didn't even talk about it here today, but the thing that got me the most feedback, it got me the most email feedback, was the burgeoning love story between Captain Hook and the Wicked Witch.
Yeah.
Like everybody really liked that, and that was cool. So I was like, yeah, I'll run with that. Why not? And then I was imagining, at the end of this, Hook is captured, the witch is vanquished, but she's going to want to come back and get him because she got kind of a thing for him now.
They're a great couple.
They are a great
they're
couple.
both evil.
Yeah.
Each other, yeah.
Evil love story.
Yeah.
Are you a good witch or a bad witch? Oh, I'm a very bad witch. Marvelous.
Who's your favorite character to draw in this?
I think I like Wendy. I just think I loved.
She's got your
this,
pixie cut.
Yeah, the boyish design, and I really like her personality too. So I think definitely my favorite. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thanks. I really wanted to extend their characters beyond like the original, because they're not little girls anymore, they're teens, and they've been through a lot since then, and they've grown up and matured. So Alice got kind of angry, and Wendy got kind of like rough and tumble tomboy, because Alice basically went to this complete nonsense world. The other two girls had kind of linear adventures where they won the day and then came home, so they would probably end up with more confidence. Whereas Alice went to this, if you read the original source, she basically spends half her time terrified, crying, or running for her life. So it was a very traumatic experience for her.
Yeah.
So that's why she's a little messed up now. Not crazy, not evil or anything like that, but she's very grumpy and angry at the world. Whereas Wendy spent her time with like
pirate, fighting pirates and stuff like that. So of course she's a good swordsman and she can fly. She learned that from Peter. And then there's Dorothy, who I wanted a personality trait for Dorothy that was unique. So I just decided that she dedicated herself to getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So her intelligence is her principal asset. And so she's good at coming up with, she's the one who comes up with all the plans. She's the one who, stuff like that. And I kind of, I explain that with like, oh, she had the scarecrow once he got his brain. Like she says, I want you to teach me how to be logical and rational. I want to learn how to think.
Yeah,
so
I see it too. Fun. Do you think Tink's a good guy or a bad guy?
In this, she's a good guy.
Yeah.
In the original, I would say she is very interesting. I've always had a great love of Tinkerbell as a literary character because she is like, we all think of her as like, oh, she dings the Disney logo and that's what she does. No, she's straight up evil in the original Peter Pan. She is straight up evil, then she has a redemption arc of sorts. So like throughout most of Peter Pan, she's trying to kill Wendy. Not, oh, I want to kill Wendy. Literally trying to commit homicide on Wendy. Like telling people to shoot at her, trying to drown her, sitting around doing nothing when she gets caught. The only time she finally is when Peter is in danger, then she's willing to sacrifice herself to save him. So she's not completely, sociopathic. But she still never really likes Wendy. She never accepts Wendy. She is a mean, vindictive, like little fairy. And so, she is like evil for most of that story. So in this, I really made her. I didn't want to get too deep into that stuff, so I just made her like her focus is entirely Peter.
Yeah.
She only went to Wendy because Peter was in trouble, and so she's still not buddies with Wendy. And then later on, she also does have a bit of a self-sacrifice, but that's to save her fairy brethren.
Right.
Yep.
Any last questions from the crowd? Oh yeah, right up in front.
Why, when in the book, like they were together, both of the bad people?
The witch and Captain Hook?
Yeah. Why did in one of the parts you put hearts around him?
Why did I or didn't I?
Why did you?
Because she's got a crush, or they're falling in love.
Which?
I don't know. There were hearts around him. I think there's one part where he says, "Excellent form, Miss West," and she's like, "Thank you, James," and there's like little hearts.
Oh, I don't remember that actually.
It's during the battle at Castle West.
Because if there are hearts, that was probably...
Yeah, well, no, I put them in mine too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There's like cannon fire and stuff, and excellent form, Miss... I think it's before that.
Yeah.
But I don't remember either. I'll see if I can find it.
It's on page 107.
107.
Yeah, right after, like,
Yes,
spot.
thank you, James.
Oh, that.
Yeah, on page 107. I had that in my original too.
Okay.
I had little hearts around it because it means she's talking in a sweet, like, he's like, "Good form, Miss West," and she's like, "Thank you, James." Because they're attracted to each other. They've got crushes on each other, and so she likes him, and she's like, "Thank you." That's all. That's why the hearts are there.
Even bad guys can have crushes.
Sure. Hey, Captain Hook's a handsome man. He's
No,
a
he
handsome
isn't.
man. No, he isn't?
No.
You don't think he's handsome? The grown-up girls back there think he's handsome.
Pirate?
Yeah, pirates are handsome. You don't think Johnny Depp's handsome in Pirates of the Caribbean?
Not
No?
really.
We got some adult ladies back there saying yes.
Oh, yeah.
Well, in the movie, not so much, but when she draws it, yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
I like that answer.
You're hooked.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
And I like, in Hook, Dustin Hoffman's Hook is really cool looking. He's got the big red like vest coat and the big long wig and
Go.
Mr. Weir, I love your books. I've
Thank
read
you.
them, and I'm just wondering if you find writing male characters and female characters challenging in different ways, and how do you get into the mindset to write for different gendered characters?
Yeah, that's a big challenge for me. I mean, male characters are no problem because I'm male. For female characters, well, the biggest challenge was my book Artemis, which is the one that came after The Martian. The main character in that is a woman. And it's a first-person narration told by her. And so I was really nervous about that because I didn't want to sound inauthentic. I didn't want to sound like, I didn't want people to read it, especially women. I didn't want women to read it and go like, oh, this is a man pretending to be a woman. You know, and so I gave it to, just a sec, I gave it to all the women I knew who I could trust not to put it up on the Pirate Bay or whatever, and to give me feedback on the female, on the authenticity of the female voice. And they gave me feedback and I made changes. So that's kind of how I deal with that. In that is, you know, much more serious narration. In this, fortunately, the girls are, well, they're young, and so you can kind of get away with a little less character depth, make them a little more just kind of teen girl stereotypes and tropes and bit, and so I think I got, I don't know, Sarah, maybe you spent a lot of time with these characters. Did they seem to come across as suitably female?
Yeah, they're tough.
Well, yeah, they're tough.
I know, but they all, one thing I really like about all of them is they all have individual personalities. Like, they're all so distinct from one another, and they all have, like, sort of good and bad traits. You know, I don't feel like there's, like a manic pixie thing happening with any of them. And so, yeah, I think also maybe just, I don't want to speak for you, but for Cheshire, having, like, a female illustrator maybe kind of like tied everything together.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. In a visual medium, like especially like a comic book, the reader gives you so much more latitude on the writing of the female characters when they're looking at female characters. So when you're reading a book, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, this is this guy sitting at a typewriter writing this. Hopefully not too much. Hopefully you get absorbed in the story. But sometimes you'll come out of it and think, oh, this guy. But if you're looking at a woman with a talk bubble, it makes it much easier for you to accept that that's a woman saying that. And having it drawn by a woman also, like, my characters looked I literally had illustrator files of the same body and like the same face with different hair and stuff that I would just kind of like mix and match because I'm just such a bad artist. Once I drew something that looked kind of okay once, I would use it over and over again. But you know, so the girls are each distinct, and you drew them a little less grown up than I did. Like, like I just had this one shape that's like kind of like a fully grown adult woman, and she made them more tweens, kind of like. They're supposed to be 15 in the comic. Yeah.
Very good. All right. Do you have a question? No? Oh, you got one though.
Yeah.
Go for it.
I sort of forgot it.
Oh, it's okay.
That's okay.
Oh, isn't that a hassle when you forget something?
Yeah, go ahead.
What's that like?
What page?
Like that? What's it called?
What page number?
27, and also later in the book, it's like you can something fly.
Oh, those are called dingbats. They actually are. When you put silly symbols in place, it means the person is swearing. But it's imagine in a TV show it would be bleeped out. You know, that she can bleep fly. Yeah. Oh, swearing guy. It means they're swearing, but
the funny thing to me always about those kind of dingbats though is you always go to the worst possible word that it possibly can be, and so it could be that she's saying they can.
It ends in ing.
Yeah, they can walking fly. I don't know.
They can freaking fly.
Yeah, but in your head you make it a lot worse.
Yeah,
a lot worse.
But that's a convention that goes back, I don't know, 100 years or more. It's
At
just
least,
put random characters, and that's called dingbats.
Yep. And you've learned something new about swearing.
Today you've learned how to swear without swearing.
Exactly. Oh, follow-up question.
Yes,
Go ahead.
swearing guy.
Well, I sort of remembered my question.
Yeah.
Okay.
And well, about your book Artemis. Were you talking about the Greek god of hunting?
Goddess. Yeah.
So Artemis takes place in a city on the moon, and the city itself is named Artemis. And it's named Artemis, it's named after the goddess Artemis. And the goddess Artemis was, she was the goddess of a lot of things, but one of the things she's the goddess of is the moon. And also she's Apollo's twin sister in Greek mythology. And Apollo is the name of the lunar program that the United States did in the late 60s, 1970s when we landed humans on the moon.
Not just that. Apollo 1, Apollo 2.
Yeah, but they were all working
toward
toward that goal, and then all the way up to Apollo 17. So since Artemis is Apollo's twin sister, it's a good name for a thing on the moon, and she's also the goddess of the moon. Kind of makes you wonder why it wasn't called Artemis in the first place. Meanwhile, NASA's new lunar missions, after my book came out, NASA's new lunar missions are called Artemis.
Oh.
Are you getting royalties?
No. Turns out you can't copyright the name of a 6,000-year-old Greek god.
What? That hardly seems fair.
I know.
Yeah.
Quick, copyright the name Jesus.
Yeah. Well, as I said, we all loved this book, and I think we'd all love to see more.
It's past 11 now.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
That's why I'm wrapping it up.
Okay.
That was me trying to wrap it up.
And I ruined that. I ruined that.
You just stepped
I'm
on
just
my
a
pin.
constant
Yep.
source of
It's all good though.
pain in the butt.
Yeah, it's all good.
Can I say butt? Is butt okay?
Yeah. Full circle. I love it. But
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah,
I'm just joking around, man.
Yeah. I think we'd all love to see more, though, of these characters together, you guys working together in this world. I think this would be great. Are you actively working on it, at least in the back of your head?
I mean, in the back of my head, I've got a bunch of story ideas, but I'm working on my next book. I'm working on other stuff. So until somebody says yes, let's make another issue, I'm not going to, actually write things.
Well, yes, let's make another issue.
Oh well, until somebody's willing to fund another issue.
Well, I'll buy them as a bookseller. How's that?
No, that's a good start. It's good to know. It's really, like I said, another issue comes down to Sarah's schedule and the publisher's willingness to pay for the stuff. It takes very little time for me to write a comic. It takes her a very long time to draw it. So it's really up to her schedule.
What do you have on the horizon next?
So, I actually wrote a love story between a vampire and a werewolf, and it's funny. So it's not like Twilight. It's a slice of life comic that sort of follows Sarah Scribble's format, but with completely different characters and a different art style, which is a lot more similar to Cheshire.
Okay.
So that is going to be released on Halloween.
Okay.
That's very appropriate.
Yeah.
So it's a webcomic as well?
Yeah, it's
okay.
a webcomic. Yes, on Tapas,
okay.
yeah. And then it'll be published, I think, in the summer.
Okay.
And then I'm writing Sarah Scribble's book number 4. And after
Great.
that, nothing. So maybe.
All of your previous Sarah Scribbles books have like new content in there. Is this one as well?
Yeah, we do at least 20 new comics and then usually a long form story, so that's what we're probably going to be going for.
Yeah, but long form story is where mutual suspicion comes from.
Yes.
It was like your introduction to cats.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. Sounds fantastic. Well,
there's a lot of cats in her comic.
Yeah,
there are.
You might like my comic if you like.
Just one last thought. Another one of her comics, I loved another comic, shows like an angel. Yeah?
Are all her cats suspicious?
They are no. There's only one that is suspicious. The other cats are just cats. But there's one great comic that shows this angel come down from heaven and give humanity a dog, and goes like, "I have created this creature for you. It is full of loyalty and joy and love, and will be your constant companion." And then it just shows the devil in hell holds up a cat.
That's one of my favorites.
That's great. All right. Well, the book was Cheshire Crossing. We had Andy Weir and Sarah Andersen. Thank them for coming out. thank all of you for coming out. I really appreciate you guys coming out on a Sunday, especially because school's about to start again, right? Already in. All right, there you go. There you go. So if you guys just give us a couple minutes, they will be happy, I'm sure, to sign your books for you and to scribble on them. I want to thank everybody for coming out.
See what happened there?
And I want to thank our sponsors at The Beat, www.thecomicsbeat.com, which is the best website for news and analysis on comics, in my opinion. So yeah, everybody hold tight, and we'll be done. Oh, next month's book is a book called Debbie and Pearl. It is about a detective who uses computers and computer programming in the future to solve a crime. It's really cool, and it will teach you some stuff too. We've got the artists who are all local San Francisco artists. They will all be here in person, though I didn't write down the date, so you'll find out in your next email. But thank you for coming out. Thank you for watching at home. This has been the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club, and we will see you next month.
And we're out.
And we're out.
I need to go to the bathroom, but
Yeah.
I'd be happy to, I'm going to
Yeah.
sign. I'll be